All right, I'm Atano Circus, and we're going to talk about the patch notes that recently came up for Ladder Edition 12. And with me is Slammer4. He's
What's up, dudes?
he's one of the top
Happy
five
to talk about
players,
the patch.
no matter how you rank
All
him.
right, let's go.
Daz, the angry person on the line, also a top 5 player, and Visixfan, whose perspective
Heyo.
is different, but he's still better than me. So we're just going to go right down the line and start this way. So under general, first note, supply cap from
Well, it's so
100
awkward.
to 150. How good or bad? Come on, hit me with it.
Excellent. Change.
Good for Beast.
Okay, good for Beast. How so? What makes it better than going for Rax? Like, why Rax can get up to 150 supply too?
Well, but Beast is going to be getting a lot of units a lot quicker, so they can hit that 150 and have like that many units. And in practice, in the games I've played, that a lot of the times it comes out to just being enough to overwhelm Rax.
Well, to go a little further on that point, one of the main advantages Rax has is their units are more supply efficient. So like a soldier is 2 supply, but it's way more effective than a single wolf, which is also 2 supply. But wolves are so cheap that they're very supply heavy. So when you have all that extra free supply to go up to 150 instead of 100, it just it makes the cost a little less for each wolf.
And for example, like the math of it is the difference between like say before in 100 supply you'd be building up to 100 supply and Beast would get there and Rax would be so far behind in supply because they build up slower.
Right. Rax units are more gold cost, yeah.
And from there on, Rax, assuming there's no fight, Rax is going to keep on building to 100 and Beast can't go anywhere further. Now with 150 supply, what's going to happen is Beast has that 50 supply further to go. So in general, I really like the change to 150. Like, I think it makes the game a lot more dynamic because there's just more stuff and it's more fun. But I think it definitely makes Beast not necessarily imbalanced, but a lot more powerful than it used to be in LE11.
All right, now Daz, this is the longest you've been quiet in text.
Yeah, definitely agree. You can get a lot more drops and harass out because it's a smaller percentage of your army, but definitely there's a problem with balance right now where Beast just has the potential to max out at mid-game and doesn't have to tick because they don't need to trade as efficiently. They just need to trade fairly efficiently and they'll get their way into mid-late game anyway.
So something we've covered Rax and Beast and the armies, but what about the economy? Can you now have 4 base economy? Because before you don't dare go over about 25 or 30 workers because that just cuts too much in your army. It becomes less efficient. Are we going to have to start making larger maps to make up for people potentially having 35, 45 workers?
I don't know if you need larger maps, but it is true that I think it's going to be more ideal to go up to 40.
Yeah.
Because the extra 10 supply, it's going to be, I think, more worth it to have them in workers instead of units now.
But doesn't this give a buff then to Rax as well? Because their workers are still
Yeah,
human units.
I
They get
think
armor and
that
attack.
1v1 map should start focusing on getting 7 bases per player rather than 6 to match the economy.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, is to note is like on a smaller map, you're not only limited by like you might want only 30 workers or lower worker counts still just because you won't be able to secure enough bases to mine because your main's going to mine up and then you have extra workers that just aren't doing anything. So
will this make the game a bit more challenging or fun in that if you have more supply, now you can have more workers, it's worth it to have more bases, therefore people will expand more and it'll be more harassment. Do you see the game playing out pretty much the same, at least from a supply standpoint?
You're not necessarily going to expand more because you already want to expand, right? Like, and you're going to want to try to.
I think it's actually harder to expand because you're so scared of a big army suddenly coming, so you need to make a lot of Rex units, and you can't use that on like getting army.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason people are saying Beast is stronger is because now there's like a lot more opportunity for Beast to have like 3 little packs of things going around denying expansions, as opposed to having like, and like if you had that with 100 supply, like you wouldn't have a main army because those 3 packs would be your main army.
Obviously, having the supply cap changed is a massive change for the game, but we didn't have one for Ladder Edition 12, but another one. We've gone from 300 starting gold to 225, and so whoever wants to accept it, to the lay people out there, what's the difference of that 75 gold? Why is that important? Minor technical difficulties, so we're back. So in case we missed that, so you've gone from 300 starting gold to 225, so that makes Castle First weaker. Is it just because we have to collect the 75 gold, or are any of the openings changing? Is it still just proxy 1 den versus Castle First every game?
I mean,
you can speak to it, Slammer.
Okay, so the big deal with this is it slows down when you can actually place your castle. So your Castle First is going to be later, but it doesn't slow down something like a 1 den, because 1 den it's limited by how fast the house can build. So say you build 1 house, then you build your den straight away, and then your wolf comes out straight away. So the 1 den or 1 racks, there's no change in the time when you can get that out. But there is a change in the time you can get out a Castle First, just because your Castle First is going to be later, and then your subsequent house is going to be later, because you just can't afford everything.
Also makes it so you can't afford 2 racks and 2 den the way you could before. Although, like, you can't plop 2 dens like right when your house finishes. You have to wait for 40 gold. And 2 racks, you have to like I end up sending my second worker to make the second racks and 2 racks like way later now. Like when the first racks is like almost.
Particularly for racks, I was messing around with it, and it seemed very difficult to pull off a 1 racks or a Castle First into racks, because it seemed like against like a 1 den proxy, for example, you didn't have the units out fast enough to deal with it, and you just take too much damage. But maybe Daz can talk more about that, because I'm not experienced with the build necessarily.
I think the thing with fast expand is that if you get a tower, then they can take a quick third, and there's nothing you can do to punish it. So I think the best way to do is just to play 1 racks or 1 den, and then occasionally, depending on maps or meta, you can go for fast expand and just play greedy and micro workers properly.
Well, I remember Daz actually told me that one of the reasons that proxy 1 den was so powerful, this was when you started with 300 gold even, was that the wolf will get out there, and with good micro between players, then you can be expected to get somewhere between a lot of worker damage but no kills to maybe even 3 or 4 kills, and kind of even things out. But it was slowly shifting to fast expand as people's micro was getting better and better. Does this just open up the window so much more that Castle First isn't ever worth doing? Or Slammer, do you think, or Visix, do you think there's something to what Daz said?
I can definitely speak to this. As far as what is that music?
Oh, that's me.
Okay, so basically my experiences between me and Daz in LE11, I could fast expand versus Daz's proxy 1 den, and I would maybe lose like 1 worker. A lot of times I'd lose no workers. And in this patch, I will lose 2 workers, usually maybe 3 or 4, like usually more like 2. So that makes fast expand no longer really worth it for me. And if he goes 1 racks with having a raider out, I can lose like even more sometimes. So these days I try not to Castle First, although Castle First can work for and getting a tower to defend it can work for a lot of cheese builds that aren't necessarily good, like catapults and dragons, but those are out of meta, I'd say. So to take that how you will, I guess.
And Slammer, you were going to start into something, or Daz, you've got it?
I think, speaking about balance here, the allowance, like allowing fast expand to be weaker and just making 1 den 1 racks popular, it's one of the reasons why, as we mentioned somewhat earlier, it's that Beast is doing a bit better, because you sort of don't let racks get to like high tech and economy. So
Yeah, Daz?
Daz?
Daz, no.
No.
So,
But
Slimer,
what he was saying is totally correct. And another thing I kind of want to point out as we talk about this, we talked about how the supply increase favors beast. We talked about how this changed the 75 less gold starting favors beast. Each of these changes is kind of small, like a small favor, but they're kind of adding up to overall favoring beast. And I think also the priest nerf is another one. But these two economy changes in particular, they're like both small things, but they both kind of add to each other and are both helping out beast.
Yeah,
And I think that's what's causing this imbalance.
I think the big thing is supply. Like, I think that helps beast more than anything.
So it's interesting that Slammer
not
actually.
sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned priests because guess what's right the next up on the patch list? It's priests. So priests got nerfed hard, and in fact, originally every single conceivable thing about them was going to get nerfed. So the church costs more. The aura radius is smaller for their healing ward. Their healing ward doesn't regenerate as much. You know, with the exception of maybe the 5 or 10 people such as yourselves who are really, really good at LittleWarGame, Priest is a 5 pretty good unit. Like, just use it for invisibility. How bad really were priests?
How bad, as in how good?
Whatever way you want to take it, right? So why
Um,
did Priest need all of the nerfs? Like, was it really that powerful, just sitting with Arax army and healing?
short answer is yes. It's like
Yes.
crazy powerful.
Maybe Daz can talk about this more. I haven't actually played that many games with the old priest, to be honest.
Yeah, Daz, even as far back as LE, I think 10, you wanted to put spellcasters in your Rax army. So, well, come on, why priests? Why not mages?
I think the main thing is that mages compared to priests are less consistent if they do roughly equal amount of damage or heal equal amount of damage. So like mages burst, but it's kind of easy to split burst them, while priests, I mean, it's 8 HP a second on say like a dozen Rax units. You're healing like a couple hundred HP, and that can get to thousands in one battle if you're just dragging the battle out and they don't take out the healing wards. It's just ridiculous how much it heals, and there's no real answer from beasts because snakes don't have the range and dragons are not that efficient in terms of DPS and supply. Yeah.
Yeah, and beast units in general deal damage rather slowly or slower than like Rax units. They're not as bursty. So it's just they can't chunk down units as quickly, and the priest healing like overtakes that damage basically.
So, for my understanding, the thing that made priests so good, as it was communicated to me by yourselves and some other people, are that Rax units are naturally, some of them have armor, such as the soldier. They naturally have more hit points, so they're alive longer. You know, your units don't get weaker the closer to 0 they get. They're just alive or not. And so, that to me was why priests were so powerful.
Yeah.
You just keep the
And
Rax units alive, and they're not going to die as quickly. You know, you couldn't use them as beasts. Wolves aren't as tanky. Snakes aren't as tanky. Maybe
Well,
werewolves.
priest werewolf was something I saw. I
Yeah.
saw priest werewolf a few times, definitely.
I didn't. I think you
although
would get like
generally-
one priest. I don't think it was that good. I think you'd get one priest just to like heal werewolves almost out of battle, because in battle I don't think it was actually worth it. But that was my style.
I mean, the thing
I know
is,
AC played with them more.
the thing with healing werewolves is that it heals 8 HP a second no matter how many units there are. So if you're healing a couple of werewolves, that isn't as effective as healing like a dozen Rax units or whatever.
Yeah, and werewolf
The
fights.
one thing that I
very
really
short
like
period
about
of time.
this priest nerf is that it makes mages like no, because in LE11 there wasn't like do I get priest or mage? It was like, no, I just get priest because priest is better than mage. But now you see a lot of mage first before priest, and sometimes priest first. So what that does is like you get to see more mage, and like I really like mage, and I really like it when there's like cool play with the slow fields. And it's really like it makes the game more interesting. I feel like more than anything, this patch like overall for me, it makes the game more interesting and sort of more dynamic, and it makes Beast more powerful. Like that's the 2 points I would give overall.
I do think this change was very good and very necessary, and I think it puts Priests in a pretty good place because I think they're still good. Maybe some things may be tweaked. It might have been nerfed slightly too far, but overall I think Priests are now in a pretty good spot because they're, I think, still very useful. They're just less crazy healing as before.
I don't think Priest has been over nerfed at all because it still healed quite a lot, 6 HP a second, and I've definitely gotten its worth. For example, especially if you keep a couple Rax units alive, you get the Priest first, and you heal all those units to max, and that just gives you value, gold value, like value for what you pay. But on Visix's point about Mage being better, another reason is that 150 supply, the area of effect spell, Fireball, tends to hit more units, so just that change itself makes Mage stronger and more consistent, which is what it really lacked at in LE11.
So we've heard over and over about how the Priests are really strong, but would it have been better, you think, to buff Mages, or were Priests just so dominating that they needed to be toned down? Is there any other way than just making them more expensive, making them later to get out, making them less efficient?
Like, Mages are fine, and they're quite strong right now. It's just Priest it's overwhelming. It was so cheap. You're talking the cost of, like 2 or 3 Rax units to get a Priest out, and then it heals way more than 2 or 3 Rax units worth of damage. So I don't think that
is shit.
It doesn't really matter though.
Yeah, I don't think it's the
Because you
DPS
don't need to-
so much as it is the fact that they could all be healed,
Oh,
during
yeah,
the battle
like
or after the battle.
That's why Priest is good. Yeah, I was just throwing that in there.
So moving on to another thing for meta, I was seeing in BVB, even in my own games in Beast versus Beast, that there was one unit that was really good and other units were to be left behind. And that unit was the werewolf. Wolves can't really kill werewolves. Snakes do terribly against werewolves. And dragons would do well against werewolves, except for this unit called the Ballista. So we got the werewolf, his armor was nerfed a bit, but you could actually morph the werewolf den to get them a bit faster. So is this overall a buff or a nerf for werewolves? Do you think it fixes
It's
the
a nerf.
problem?
I think it's a definite nerf. The plus -1 armor is pretty huge.
Yeah, the
for
-1
certain-
armor is.
Go ahead.
I can talk about this from the perspective of one of my favorite cheeses, which is the 2-den werewolf, where you basically you proxy one wolf's den, and then you turn it into a werewolf den the moment it completes, you start the transition, and then you get your other den and you just make wolves out of that. And basically what this nerf has done is it's made it a little bit weaker, but not much, because the den morph time sort of takes maybe 2/3 of the week it made it. So basically what I'm saying there is that when you get your werewolf out, now it's a lot less strong early game, because workers can hurt it, and the soldiers or the wolves can actually effectively take it out, where before werewolves were just sort of stomped through everything because that armor was really strong. It's surprising how much damage to the werewolf just taking that 1 point of armor off of it does.
Yeah.
And it makes the cheese a little weaker overall, which is a good way to see the change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one item I would add into that is offhand, I think snakes do 7 damage. They do very fast. They fire twice as fast as an archer, but do half the damage. So they do 7 damage. One way to put this in context is that you've essentially doubled. You can now use a snake and it can damage the werewolf past its own healing ability. There's got to be something in that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I have not played a Beast versus Beast yet that someone has tried to go on werewolves.
I literally played one versus you the other day.
Yeah, but that was no. I'm saying like a
I was saying
full-on
that Visix
werewolf
doesn't count as a real beast.
No. That was a cheese game though. I'm talking about normal macro, because that was the game you went 2-den proxy cheese, right?
Yeah, I did the cheese that.
And that's
I
like
was just
separate.
talking
That's like
about.
separate. And yes, it was definitely easier to hold because my wolves did more damage. But werewolves are still very good against wolves. So I don't really know if werewolves are still going to be king in Beast versus Beast because I haven't tested like snakes versus werewolves and seeing how that interaction plays out. Because now that you can get them much faster, there's really no window where you can attack a beast player before werewolves are out. Whereas before, your only hope would be some kind of snake timing or wolf timing before werewolves and try to kill him or kill the werewolf den. So with 60 seconds morph time, I don't think that's going to be possible anymore. And I think werewolves still might be king, but I'm not sure.
So does that
I have
actually
a
make-
suspicion that snakes are just like I have a sneaking suspicion that that snakes are just gonna be dominant in all beast matchups because now but even before, if you have a plus attack advantage, snakes would rip werewolves apart with the kiting. But now with the one armor less, that's basically double damage at base. There's just so much more damage, and 150 supply. You can max out on snakes, and just
What if you go
push
armor
through.
though? Right.
Yeah, I had an idea for a way to kill Daz's snake that I haven't used yet. That was a like timing werewolf push off 2 base with armor or off 3 base, and I think that could be really interesting.
So this is actually the story of Beasts ever since Beasts got introduced. Either all Beast units were terrible, or one Beast unit in particular was so dominant you had to use it. So prior to the LE, we had the armored wolves, and you just had to use wolves. Then we had 3-base dragon, you just had to use the dragon. Now we've had werewolves. Is it that with LE12 we're just going to make it the snake's turn, or do you think this has actually gone a long way to fixing the overall balance of beast versus beast so that there's actually some nuance in it?
It's tricky because beast versus beast is very. I mean, one unit I think is going to be always relatively dominant, and personally, I would prefer snakes being dominant over werewolves. I think that's more interesting in general, because I do think there's things you can do with dragons as well, snake openings and stuff. But yeah, if in fact werewolves die to snakes, then I think snakes are going to be king for sure.
All right, I guess we'll just have to watch that in the future, especially
But
since it sounds like both of you think snakes are going to be a bit ridiculous.
It's
Not-
hard for me
Snake
to
is king.
comment though because I haven't played very many full-on beast versus beast games. I don't know if Daz or Visix have.
We tend to go like Beast versus Rax or Rax versus Beast, but we've definitely played a few Beast versus Beast. And I think Snake is definitely king. Like I agree with everything everyone else is saying about Snake. And also another thing about Snake versus Werewolf that's interesting is that even if you get werewolves and you could theoretically kill their snake army because you have like some werewolves with some armor, that's gonna suck for you anyways because you have a really, really slow army. And what he's gonna do is he's just gonna kill every one of your expansions and keep you from really expanding. Well, he expands fine because anytime you try to push, he can just take everything back and uses snakes to defend because werewolves are very, very slow.
It's possible in Beast versus Beast, like if we're like the issue I had with werewolves is there's really no necessary counter to them. Like you can go catapults, but I'm not sure if that's very good. Like the only thing that really counters werewolves is other werewolves, really, when they have all that armor. So I feel like with snakes, I think there's going to be other units like perhaps mages, perhaps priests. Like there are units you can add into that composition, things you can tech to that are going to make your snake army better. So I think that's going to be a more interesting dynamic. So that's why I'm definitely happy with this change and why I think everyone was just frustrated with the werewolf meta, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. So we're just going to go over to a couple of quality of life changes, and I expect we'll breeze through them really quickly. But so angular velocity has been removed for dragons and airships, and for those of you who have not suffered through it or don't understand its impact, angular velocity essentially meant that if you told an airship or a dragon to go up, and then you immediately changed your mind and wanted it to go down, it would do it in a looping slow pattern as opposed to just turning around immediately. And that made you take extra hits, it made your units not as responsive, it definitely indirectly nerfed dragons and catapult drops and things of that nature. So is there any downside to getting rid of angular velocity?
No.
No.
All right.
I like
change.
it gone.
All right, there we go. And another quality of life fix. I don't know how this happened actually. So watchtowers now do their full damage once you've researched detection. So there's that. But that's kind of a
That's fun.
throwaway. So let's go on to this. So, jokes aside, a lot of changes have happened to watchtowers. Do you think the game would be in a better place if we split the watchtower into anti-ground and anti-air?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I mean, I don't
think
see the
watchtowers are
point.
actually pretty good right now.
I feel like that's just making it unnecessarily complicated for SimCity, and I don't know. I guess it allows you to cut corners, but I just don't see the point. Especially, I mean, watchtowers right now aren't that strong anyway. You get a couple of units and you can just tear through a watchtower.
Yeah, for me at least, it's rare that you get a watchtower for anti-air. It's just particularly for like dragons, right? Or maybe airships.
Yeah,
But I
it
still
also
feel like it makes more sense for them to be like drop defense as well. And I don't really see the rationale for changing it from like making a cheaper building or something that can just shoot air. It doesn't feel necessary to me. Like it feels like it makes more sense for it to have multi-purpose. If that makes sense.
I feel like it's probably just a indirect, like a beast buff, because
I'd rather see
What's the
something with the
so-
ballast day, to be honest. So I feel like towers, and just to elaborate on towers a little bit more, they've kind of been a discussion point and an argument point for a long time in LittleWarGame. And I feel like right now they're in probably one of the better places they've ever been, whereas they're relatively cheap, but they're not so strong that they can just be spam necessarily. Like they're fairly, like units beat them very easily, but they're still strong early game. So, and they're still good at like denying a single dragon or a couple dragons. So I think towers are probably in a really good spot right now.
So your point is that you would never
It's-
spend, for example, you would never spend, say, 1,000 gold on watchtowers, put 8 watchtowers down, and then just laugh as that destroys it. Because if someone puts 1,000 into the same army, they're probably going to, in addition to having mobility advantages later in the game, they're going to be able to take them out. Also, it probably would step on ballistas a
Well-
little bit.
Especially, well, another thing to note is especially with the new supply chain. So there were definitely points in the game where if you're maxed out, you could just start throwing down more towers. And this is more day patches with like 200 gold houses and stuff. But now with 150 gold, you're gonna probably see even less of that. Like, so.
Okay.
I think right now it's good to basically cut all the towers you can, because it's so important to have a high standing supply army, and you just don't want to invest in towers which don't do anything. They're like 120 gold, but they don't trade as well as like 2 archers or like 3 snakes or whatever. They're not that good. They're just marginally better, but then you can't move them, so you don't really want them at all.
Right.
But they're in a good place. You wouldn't change them. You think they do their job of being efficient in the early game and then becoming less efficient or less gold efficient later on. You wouldn't change them otherwise.
Yeah, for me, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you still see in this patch, once both players are at 150, and if you hit a lull where there isn't any action for one reason or another, or like players are bad or whatever.
I have a question for you. Have you ever hit 150 supply for more than 30 seconds in this patch? Because I don't think I actually have. And I think it's really rare for me to hit even like 130, 120, even as Beast.
But just to talk about that, even if like that situation could arise, it is good to have something you can put your gold into. So, like, I think towers are good in that sense, even though it is like theoretically, if you're like both players are teching up to like mages and stuff, and they don't want to necessarily take fights and they're just jockeying on the map, I could see where that could come into play.
But I think you actually want a bank, and you need production facilities to remax as soon as the fight happens. So I wouldn't waste money in towers.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's also
That's
a
true.
lot of APM to just go doing towers when you could instead be throwing like 8 snakes into a mineral line somewhere.
Yeah, that's a solid point. It's a good point of contention. So let's get on to this. We talked about indirect mage buffs before. You're at 150 supplies, so Fireball's more likely to hit. But now mages, their slow field only affects enemy units. and it doesn't affect your own units at all. So is that the buff that they needed? Is that too powerful? Like, how does this put it on even ground with the priest? What would you do with it? Would you even use them?
Hey, before we get into this, I just gotta take off,
Oh,
go
okay.
eat. So
Yeah.
I think we covered some good ground.
All right.
But
Yep.
thanks for having me on the podcast. Catch you guys later.
Yeah. Catch you later, Slammer.
Yes.
Catch you later.
As a brief aside before that continues, if you like the content of Slammer4 and want to hear more about what he has to say, go to his YouTube channel. Link will be in the description box below. All right, Daz, you were about to hit me with it. Come on.
Before I even talk about mages, Slowfield, I think one of the things that are too powerful is that they stack, and that if you put two Slowfields on one unit, then the unit can't move at all, which feels, regardless of balance, doesn't feel good when you just get pinned down and you can't move and micro at all. But in terms of the power of the mage, I mean, it's definitely something that is strong. Being able to position your opponent, outposition your opponent, because you can change the way their army moves. And I'm not sure if, wait, I think mages have, Mage Slowfield has always been 50 mana, right? Or has it been 60 before?
It was 60 previously. And that was
Yeah.
another thing that wasn't put in the patch notes, but the slow field now, in addition to only affecting your units, its area of effect is smaller, but it also costs less mana. So
Yeah, that's
Pretty
actually a
powerful
big buff because now I can cast two Slowfields in succession off one mage. It's a huge buff.
well, what does it translate to? Like, Daz, Physics, what would you actually do with this? Is this a one-of unit that you put in? Do you, I don't know, use it as part of
No,
drops?
right now a mage is something you spam because it's just so strong. In Rex vs Rex, you can go plus range on your archers, and then get slow fields, and you can use the slow field, especially if you stack two of them, to like just freeze their units, and then you just range them from like distance. And in Rex vs Beast, you can do the same thing with beast units, except you probably don't want range. You probably just want armor because you need to minimize the snake damage. It's just so useful, and being able to use two at once means each mage has more ammunition, so you can just like use it and not worry about wasting it too much, as you can cast it again from the same mage during like the pre-battle where you're just positioning. While before, if you cast one, then that'd be like 30 seconds where you just can't use another slow field from that mage, and it's much more risky to just use the slow fields and get it baited.
Now, Visix, I know that you've been talking about a couple of cheeses you've done here and there. Does this inspire you? Are you going to find like Mage Guild first cheeses that you're going to start using? Like, what do you think of the mage?
I like mages, and I'd really like to. I've done it a little bit before, but I'd like to do more like mage drops, like mid game and late game. As far as a one-base cheese, mage is like very much weaker than everything else, as well as priest. Like the only options are 2 racks and 2 den, really, and there's like other stuff and cata drops. Cata drops, 2 racks and 2 den are they're the real cheeses right now. I'd say, and like dragons suck basically off one base. Like they can work, but dragons are just too easily countered by like throwing down a tower and then having 2 base. So yeah, I've tried mage off one base. I've tried like getting 2 mage dens. It doesn't work well.
All right, so on to the final thing. Before I just open the floor entirely to whatever you guys want to talk about, and we're going to get into the Raider. Now, Daz, I know this unit is close to your heart, so wait for me to read all of the things, all the ways it was buffed, before we start talking about it. So, the Raider's building requirement has been removed, so you can now just build it off of a barracks. It's Shroud Research that, for those of you who don't know, Shroud, any unit inside of the Shroud, has its range turned to melee. And that requirement for researching that was removed. the Raider's flash chain cooldown has been set to 0. So you can flash or teleport and then do it again, or you can teleport and then immediately attack afterwards. There's no cooldown for it. With all of that, Daz, thank you for keeping it in this long. Is that enough to make Raiders good?
I think Raiders are definitely viable right now. When I go 1-Rax expand or proxy 1-Rax expand, I think getting a Raider first is really good because it gives you a lot of, I mean, it's the early game, so you have a lot of spare APM, and you can just use that on microing the Raider. And the Raider is a unit that benefits greatly from being able to control it properly, using its flashes, its shrouds. It's probably the highest skill unit in the game right now. And I think you can see that clear differentiation when you see someone who's not as experienced in using it with someone who is, which I think is great. So the one thing that does worry me a little is that, in my opinion, it's a unit where if you use it to great effects, then you get a small net positive, but if you micro it badly, then you have like a large net negative in the value of its unit. So basically what I'm saying is sometimes it feels like it's not worth it to get it because it's difficult to be consistently good with the Raider, especially with its flash, which is a bit wonky in terms of how it works in the game. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on that, Visix?
So basically, to clarify, Daz, it's been buffed through the stratosphere, but you want it to be buffed even more. Okay, come on, Visix.
Well, I don't know if I agree with Daz completely, but I will say that Raider was like a non-unit before. Like if someone was getting Raiders, I'd be like, great, they got Raiders. I don't need to worry about them nearly as much. But like now, like Raider first is very scary, especially like if you're going den, if you're going 1-Den expand and they're going proxy 1-Rax with a Raider, having a Raider up in your base when you have only 1 wolf is really scary, and oftentimes you have to pull workers, which is not good. And basically it can lead to you, like, even though you went 1-Den and 1-Den is cheaper and you should be able to expand earlier, if you lose like 2 workers defending, you've lost the edge of 1-Den economically. If you lose even like 1 worker, you've like lost the vast majority of it. And if you delays your expansion, then that's also just not good.
But I just want to sort of disagree on that point, because for the Raider to get to your base before the wolf gets to my base, I need to have a proxy 1-Rax, and proxy 1-Rax, like, I'm going to lose the Rax as we approach the mid game. So that by itself is a big investment, and I don't think, like, even if you lose a worker or 2, the economic damage I did to myself by putting the Rax in the middle of the map and taking a worker, moving across the map, so forth, I don't think it counteracts how much I lose when I do damage to you. And I think if I do a 1-Rax at home, 1-Rax expand, the Raider doesn't ever really get to your base before you already almost have the castle up, have a couple wolves. So what I'm saying is, yeah, I can do some damage if I proxy it, but it's not worth it against competent players, especially once you get used to it. So if I do it to you a few more times, you're just gonna get used to it, and you can just have a really optimal response to it, and there's nothing I can do.
So with that, Dad, so I've got a buff idea, okay? And if this doesn't work, tell me something that you think would actually make the Raider worth it. So I'm not gonna do something, expected, like reduce its cost or make it build faster or buff its stats in some other way. I'm going to give you this. What if the Raider had the same regeneration speed of a wolf? Would that be enough to buff it, to make it interesting?
That would be really cool. That would be really cool.
Because think about it. You attack, you run away. It's pretty fast. It has a teleport, but it's not faster than wolves and snakes. But it is faster than workers. Would that be enough? Or is that not the right choice, you think?
But I think Raiders aren't weak right now. I think Raiders are fine in terms of strength. And especially with the right engagement, Shroud can do so much. But you could allow it. You could buff it like that and let it sort of hit and run more. But I don't think it's necessarily weak. Like, I don't think you should be looking at a change like that as the raid is too weak, we need to buff it. It's more like, is this a change we want to improve the gameplay of the raider? And I don't know if the answer is yes for that.
Okay, so buffing it to the extent that it's going to be good as a normal unproxied 1-Rax unit might actually be destructive to its abilities overall in the game.
I mean, no, it's like, the thing is, the Rax is too expensive for someone playing the Rax style to lose. Because if you think about it, Barracks player normally makes less Rax than how a Beast player makes dens. So each Rax is worth more, and it's also 150 gold, which is a lot more investment in the early game. And you have less mobility, so you're probably not going to get out of as many units as when you can put on the pressure with a proxy den. So all of these changes mean proxy 1-Rax will inherently be weaker than a proxy 1 den. And unless you really break the units that are coming out of it, 1-Rax at home is always going to be better.
So a final thing with the Raider is that we've talked a bit about how Shroud is pretty good, but that's not the thing that's really concerning. The thing that I've heard repeatedly from both of you and from others is that, frankly, the teleport is terrible. Flash. It's finicky, it's a bit wonky. Has that been fixed by LE12? Or does it need to be redesigned? Physics, what do you think? You've been quiet for a while.
About the Flash thing, I'd have to disagree with you that it's terrible. I think there's I think it's probably worse for people who are like worse at using raiders, but say when Daz is using a raider on me, I generally see that maybe 20% of the time he's gonna go for a jump, and not because I dodged it, but because like it's just sort of wonky. It's gonna screw up and he's not gonna like get the hit with the jump because it's hard to use, not in a way that is like skill oriented, but is just in a way that it's wonky and like it doesn't work
Okay,
like
so
100% of the time. Only like 80.
I'm gonna be speaking from the perspective of a player who's probably used raiders the most, the past few patches.
This is the part where you drop, oh, I'm like one of the better players and something like that. Come on, go, let's do it, Daz. I want to hear this.
Oh, come on, no, I'm not gonna say that. Come on. Okay, but the thing is, okay, there's two. Okay, when I use Flash, let me just try to collate my thoughts on how I micro. One of the things with Flash is it's a 4-range teleport, and on the Flash, when it moves to the new location, any units around it will do damage to immediately after. So it's like a burst damage and a Flash, which is probably it's pretty good. It's a pretty cool ability. But when you micro it, you can't click on the unit. You have to click right next to the unit because of the hitboxes. When you try to teleport onto another unit, if you go right on top of it, it's gonna naturally move away, and you're not gonna be right next to the unit, so it doesn't do damage. Which means when you flash, you need to accurately click right next to the unit, which is really hard to do unless you practice it, and it's kind of messy because it's like a 1-2 pixel area where you have to click and hit the flash. How I normally hit the
pixels.
Oh, come on. No. How I normally hit the flash is when units are chasing me, I flash next to it, and a unit runs into my flash. Or it's just a static unit, like a worker building, because then you can guarantee hitting the flash right next to it. But when a unit's running away or whatever, it's basically impossible to hit the flash. And secondarily, how the flash works is it does damage to a highest unit priority. So the units that are next to you need to be the highest unit priority. But if it's, for example, if I want to kill a worker, but there's a wolf attacking me, then if I flash next to a worker, it's not going to do damage to a worker because the raider wants to attack the wolf, not the worker. So these two problems make Flash really hard to support in the game long term, since it's just not nice to have to know about these sort of mechanics and micro around it.
Yeah, I helped make some of those, and even I wasn't aware of just how finicky it was and how the priority worked entirely. That's pretty interesting. But what about the space component of it? I mean, surely if you have flash, if you have teleport, you can go up and down ledges, provide there's vision. There are a lot of flat ground or high ground mains that you can run into and then teleport out of. Is that not worth it, or is it just not really what you're hoping to get out of a raider?
There's one thing with the raider that, like, for example, in StarCraft, when you blink a stalker, if you don't click on the ground on the other side of where you're going to go, like let's say there's a ravine that you're trying to cross, but if you click on like just the edge of the edge of where the ravine is, like the unpassable space, it'll still blink you to the other side because it's like, oh no, he obviously wanted to go over here because that's closer to where his cursor is. But if you try and do that with a raider, you will just blink right in place. And like hopping ledges and stuff, even where it is possible, it's also like finicky because you'll like try and hop the ledge and then you'll just teleport in place and it's annoying.
Yeah, speaking of that, when I use the raider to flash a ledge or like a space, I never use the full range because I know the raider will probably move or like try to attack a wolf near me or something because you're often trying to get away. And then adding like half the square of range means you fail to flash. So I always give myself a safety buffer when I flashed a raider, which is, I mean, it's a lot of workarounds with the way I micro it, which is why I can use the raider more consistently than most players.
But it's not intuitive, right? You have to learn these things.
Yeah, it's not intuitive.
So that's what you were going back to earlier, Daz, when you said it's maybe not well designed, but it's a good unit. It's just that the way it works, you have to put in a lot of effort to get very little result.
I don't think it's a problem of design. I think it's a problem of execution in the game because a flash with damage could really be, a decent spell to use and watch because you can do a lot of cool things with it. Raider's a really cool unit. So think about how many uses there are for its different spells. You can use the flash to get into mains or whatever, like Fog of Souls. You can flash into the main, or you can just get out. You can see how you can evade wolves and so forth by knowing where to flash and where ledges are. And then you can look at Shroud. What can it cover? It can cover main army. It can cover towers, and it can harass or attack. These sort of things. You can zone a lot of things with it, and it's just multi-purpose.
Yeah. I also wish that I don't know if it would be balanced, but I wish you could like flash with no vision, because right now you need vision to flash up ledges, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I could definitely take a look at that. I don't know.
I don't know. I think that's kind of gimmicky to flash into a place you have no vision of.
No, you misunderstand.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's going to be changed like that immediately, but I don't know myself in the editor whether or not you need vision in order to see where you're flashing. So, sorry about this, guys, but the last 2 minutes or so I was trying to reconnect because of all the errors that I was experiencing. So, I'm assuming now that you're talking about replacing one of the priest spells for some kind of dispel or debuff.
We were talking about,
yeah.
I rose the idea of like, as a priest spell, dispel and being able to like clear out a mage's slow field, and Daz didn't like the idea.
So this goes to a more general topic, which I've heard murmured about here and there. So we have 3 human spellcasters by all accounts. We have a mage, a priest, and sometimes a raider, as finicky as it may be. Do beast or mech need another spellcaster? Maybe that would fix the problem, putting these abilities on a different unit entirely.
I think a beast spellcaster would be really cool. Myself.
Yeah, I mean, we've always talked about it. Giving beast a spellcaster would be, give it a lot more power. And I think the main thing we've touched on a little is that beast doesn't have enough variety. You want to find the optimal units to play with, and then you don't really need spellcasters or advanced tech. I mean, right now, like, let's just talk about right now, Rex vs. Beast, you can just make snakes, just 90% snakes, 10% wolf, and you can win a lot of Rex games. I mean, I think it's really difficult to win as Rex right now in LE12 because the flood style is just so strong.
We went back to this even in the beginning. It was the supply. It was the fact that everything else has just been kind of nerfed. You know, dragons were nerfed a bit, or redesigned rather. Werewolves are a bit weaker, and snakes are just these hyper efficient for DPS units. And you get, if you are playing beast, which means you're more likely to get ahead in attack upgrades, then you're just going to become 2 or 3 times more efficient the more upgrade advantages you have. So are snakes the next unit that need a nerf, or do other powerful possibilities have to be sent out?
I think I have, in LE12, this patch, an undefeated record with Beast versus Rax in, like, just games. Just versus Slammer, AC, Visix. And I personally, I've only won, like, 1 game of Rax vs. Beast in, like, I don't know, a good 6, 7, 8. Playing as the Rax player versus Slammer or AC, because I just don't know how you can win. It's because you just can't trade when you're on the map. If you get a bad position, there's just so much. And then the remax. Think about it like this. I often get 10, 11, 12 dens. And the time to produce a snake is 16 seconds. So you can get 72 supply of units in less than a minute. That remax is just ridiculous when you consider that you have a better economy as well as a beast player. You can take your 4th, 5th easily. And I think just a lot of advantages lean it towards the Flood Beast style right now.
You also mentioned that barracks cost 50 gold more, so you're going to have fewer barracks than you are going to have dens. So
no, but that's not the problem. The problem is that to trade properly, to trade gold efficiently, you need spellcasters. So you need your mages, you need your priests, probably raiders. I mean, these sort of units let you trade efficiently, but you need your 4th base, your 5th base, and that's simply too hard to take when you're on 3, 4 base. When you're it's simply too hard to take your additional bases when the beast starts getting to like 120, 130, 140 supply, and he just keeps it coming with all these dens. So yeah.
And it's also like the supply change at a certain level, it necessitates getting you have to get like 4 base because the other player is going to have 4 base in this supply chain, and it's a lot easier to defend that 4 base as Beast than it is as Rax, because Rax is slower and Rax is less units. And when Rax pushes out across the map, it sort of has to be decisive and like it has to be like very personally threatening to the Beast, because if not, the Beast will just go and clear out every worker line while your army is out.
But that's another thing. The Beast, it's always been like this, where the Beast, you don't know what he's doing until, you know, until your Rex is at his base. So you need to be careful how you move out. But, like, what I'm saying is it's easy to get away with greed as Beast, and not as easy to get away with it as Rex, because the Beast knows what you're doing with its faster mobility. So you can't really punish the Beast, and you can't stop him getting to critical numbers, but how are you going to take your 4th and 5th? It's really difficult. I mean, I think the way to win as Rax right now is to have a really good reactive, defensive, vision-based game. So you just want houses everywhere. I even used a bird. I used 1 bird in the center of Bastion, because there's bird spots where you can just put them on the high ground, and then you just keep track of their army, try to trade efficiently, and get your mages, all your tech out, and then you can move out with your full supply army.
And also versus Beast, like Beast relies a lot on getting attack upgrades now to make Snake strong. So doing Rax drops is really like a good way to counteract that right now. And the one thing you always see focused when a good Rax player drops is the upgrade buildings.
Yeah, the testing labs.
Yeah, you want to get those out of the way because those are like the number one priority.
I actually think drops are really weak in this patch because
Okay.
because it's like okay. When you spread your dens out, you're getting 10, 11, 12. You can spread it all across the map. So and they're coming every 16 seconds. So basically what you're saying is the furthest away units can be is 8 seconds minimum. And then you have more units reinforcing. So if you have Ordis vision from all these dens spread out, then you can just re-rally them to wherever the drop is coming, and you can always deny it. It's just having that many dens allows you to put buildings everywhere, get vision out, and you don't even need towers. I don't think a beast should even get a single tower the whole game, because you can just get enough dens, and that gives your defensive coverage, because towers aren't that strong. So you shouldn't bother with them if you just have good map awareness, and your units are fast enough to get to where they need to.
So does that mean that instead of a beast spellcaster, we should go from perhaps a new unit should be made for Rex, some kind of super soldier, something.
I think there's enough units for Rex. I think Beast just needs a nerf right now. I think Snake's way too cost efficient.
What if you just did a Rax buff instead of a Beast nerf?
Well, the thing is that we would also want the game to still be enjoyable. And there is talk, like I said, we've been talking about it for a long time, of a Beast spellcaster. And I don't think buffing Rax would fix all the problems that would then show up when a Beast spellcaster shows up who also redefines the game. So let's get into that. What would you actually want? If you had 3 to 5 things, what would you want the most out of LE13?
I mean, I'm fairly happy with where the game is at in terms of the base right now, apart from, as I've mentioned enough, where Beast is just too strong this patch. I think what I'd really like is the ability to play different styles of Rex and different styles of Beast. Because right now, you basically get one superior style, and there's not much variation in that. So for example, I'm just going to talk about LE11 because it's way more refined. But LE11, the way to play Rex was just play a push style. You're playing an aggressive push, you try to get in the 4th, and you get Priest, you get your Ballista to deal with the dragons, and then you just push with that army and see if you can break the Beast. And the Beast side would play Wolf Snake, Dragon, and try to get damage with dragons, wolf snakes, try to split the Rex apart, and then they'd take into werewolves and go Snake Werewolf. And this would happen basically every game. So it'd be really straightforward and just be about execution. And the thing is, when XCam and I talked about maps, with map making, you have to appeal to like this basically. So what makes a good Rax map, good Beast map, how easy it is to take the 3rd, and how easy it is for dragons to harass. That was the main things in LE11. And the main thing is, if you took away dragon viability, then Beast would be quite weak. And if you made it really hard to take the 3rd for the Rax, then Rax would be really weak. So what we said was, if you could have different styles and they're both fairly viable, then if one style doesn't work on a map, then you can do the other style and it's still balanced. But right now, if you just mess with the map a little and the current style doesn't work, then it's just strictly weaker. So I'll ask your guys' opinions on these styles, but I think it'd be cool if Rax could play either more faster drop styles, so get the advanced workshop, get the drops out, get the harass out, or you could play like tech heavy, which is the priest and mage. And I think Rax already has a little bit of variation in this, but I think it'd be interesting to see if we could make a bit more differentiation and that just provide the variety you need and make it a bit harder to scout for Beast. And then from Beast side, I'd like to see air-based mid-game like Dragons, Harass, and also like a solid ground-based mid-game, but maybe not Werewolves because those are just late game. So maybe Beast need a mid-game unit or a mid-game spellcaster that lets them stay on the ground and harass on the ground rather than necessarily in the air. So what are your thoughts on this? Sorry, that was a little long.
No, it's fine. So I'll actually take the first round here. So for the Beast side, I think what the Beasts need in a spellcaster is something that's not groupable. So if you look, for example, at the Snake when it was being designed, Wolves generally had been played as a walk up, do some damage, run away. So it was important that the Snake in concept and design was a unit that was really efficient the longer it stayed in the battle. And so it was a high DPS unit. So I actually think that since they synergize really well, any potential Beast spellcaster should in fact be something that excels when it's separated from other units or in some way affects enemy and ally units the same way. So that you don't just send it in with a group and attack with everything. On the rack side for dropping, that was kind of the intention with the Raider, was to make it a bit faster so it could compete with map vision. But I actually think what you said earlier, what you and Visix said earlier about how Rax can't really move out because it faces a problem no matter what it does. I think that could be both sides of this, instead of new units, could be fixed with more unique upgrades. I think if you had upgrades that came out for different units at different times that change these balances, then you have more tools. Physics?
I do think, sorry, I'll just butt in quickly, but I think that's a good idea, except I think it's just the supply. It makes it really hard to move out for Rex. I mean, if you watch any of my Rex vs Beast games in Alley 11, I'd push out a good 2-3 times before I even go for a game-ending push at 100 supply. But I can't do that in Alley 12 because I'm scared the Beast might have 120 supply of units, and I might just die because I don't know what they're doing. Not easily, anyway. But Visix can speak more about what he thinks.
I feel like you just need to use Bird, man. Like, birds are good scouts. Like, they die to snakes, but I feel like you can get a scout if you're going to take a bird out there. Like, as Rax. At some level.
So what about changes? Are there any new units or any redesigns or anything like that that you think are necessary or that you personally like?
I was just addressing that one thing, but as far as like the real general thing of it, for LE13, I feel like, I don't know, I agree with a lot of what Daz said. As far as a Beast unit, I'd like to see you speak more to what you mean when you say that it's like not good with the rest of the army, because I don't really get that.
Okay, so this is not my actual idea, but just to get the concept out there, okay. Imagine if you had a unit that gave minus attack and armor to every unit that surrounded it in an aura at all times. So you don't want it with your own units. You want it to go up and cuddle with your opponent's units. But you would also have to micro, because you don't want, if your units get into that when they meet in the battle, then you're not getting an actual advantage. And so you would have this unit that you would want to make very few of and keep away separately, and something that's not massable and strictly bad when massed or just grouped together with your army. Again, that's not the idea. That's not the actual unit. That's just a concept.
What if you had like an aura dude, like where his spell cast switches his aura, and like around him it was like minus attack or like slowly killing, like doing damage over time. But I feel like that would just be vulnerable to focus, like with the size of armies.
I think, I don't know. I feel like I would like some sort of mid-game synergy. Well, not necessarily synergy, but like sort of like a decent unit which Beast can rely on. And maybe that's also got a bit of spellcasting capability. Because I think a unit like that sounds really... It doesn't feel like it'd be fun to play with if it's sort of about to be so careful of it in a way. I mean, it's really hard when you go off that idea because I think your idea objectively is bad. Because can you imagine like mismicroing and then letting it be in your army? It doesn't just feel like you didn't position well. It feels like that mistake just lost you the game, which is doesn't feel good.
Oh
Especially for Little War Game, which is like a lot of what I like about Little War Game is that there's a lot of harass and army positioning. Army positioning is really big in Little War Game, and it's not often one mistake that just loses you the game, but 2 or 3 successive ones based on control.
yeah. Again, that was just to show the idea that you could have a unit that would hurt your own unit or would be better by itself, for example. Um, Something like that, even if the idea itself is subjectively bad. So, with that, I think that's everything. We've covered all the notes, we've covered all the things, and we even covered so far that Slammer had to leave. Rest in peace, Slammer. So, we'll
Rip.
see you in the next one. So, with that, any final words, anything for either one of you? Visix, you first.
I just want to thank Atano for this great patch, and like I think that we went over a lot of the things that we liked and didn't like about it, but like overall I really like this. It makes the game more dynamic, it makes the game more fun, and this patch is sick, and I think we should all owe it to Itano for that.
Come on, Daz.
Beast is immo. Beast players are shit. But yeah, I think this overall is a good patch for gameplay. It gives a lot more options, even if the balance isn't quite there. And I think, I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the game develops from here, because it's fun. That's most important, right?
Oh yeah. All right. Out.